Is wisdom because it is felt? That is the question somebody placed within my comment section. When I am asked that question, my first thought is that we need to question what wisdom is before we can ask whether wisdom is because it is felt. The way the question is being asked assumes we already know what wisdom is. It is as if we are asking from the position of already knowing wisdom and then asking whether what we already know is wisdom because it is felt. Thus the question, is wisdom because it is felt? But before we can answer that, we have to begin with the question itself. What is wisdom? And can that question be asked? My understanding is wisdom is not just knowing things. It is not merely practical knowledge, intelligence, caution, or common sense. Looking both ways before crossing the street may be useful, but that is not the kind of wisdom being spoken of here. The word wisdom has been used out of context. It has been confused with knowledge, intelligence, cleverness, practicality, and the ability to avoid obvious danger. But wisdom is not merely knowing how to survive in the world. It is not simply being able to figure things out or say something intelligent. Wisdom is connected to what brings the self closer to God. It is where one begins to see divinity in all things. I explained one version of how we can approach the word felt, and again, I am not trying to pick on his words or play word games. It is important. Because what do we mean when we say something has been felt? What sense are we saying we are using to feel with so that we can say it has been felt? Felt is not the same as feeling. It is something that was feeling, something that has already been felt. So now it has entered the range of emotion as something that can be thought about. It was felt. That is why the question is important to answer first within ourselves. What is wisdom in the first place? Only then can we ask, is wisdom something that can be felt? And when you say felt, what do you mean by that? What does that mean in itself? How is it possible for wisdom to be felt? Well, it is intuitive. It is a pressure. It comes through knowledge. We would like to be able to say it comes from God, but then we cannot say that. The truth comes from God, falls into a lie, becomes knowledge, transforms into wisdom, and then returns back to God. But you cannot say that. I know I just did, but what I just said cannot be said. Try to explain that. That is the thing. This is where it gets tricky. Whenever I say that is wisdom, it starts to sound like a truth statement. It starts to sound like I can point to something and say there, look at that. Then, because I pointed to it and you looked at it, now you become wiser. But that is exactly not what I mean. Wisdom is not something I can point to like an object and then hand over to somebody else. It is not a thing that becomes wisdom simply because I say it is wisdom. Wisdom is personal. It cannot be handed from one man to another as information. One person may point, but another still has to see. A person cannot truly claim himself to be wise. If he claims wisdom as possession, he has already inverted it. One man also cannot simply declare another man wise in the deepest sense, because wisdom is not a badge that can be placed from the outside. There is a paradox in this. It is like saying, it takes one to know one, but then the problem appears. If one cannot claim wisdom, how can one name it in another? If one does claim himself to be wise, he has already done the opposite. The way I see wisdom, it is about perspective. It is looking at one thing that never changes while all things around it change, while also understanding that the thing being looked at is not a thing in time or space. Anytime we say that we are looking, we are already saying that we are in thought. We are thinking. And by thinking, we are sensing. And by sensing, we are sensing around us. And that around us is from within us. It is hard to give examples because wisdom happens in the moment. It comes through personal experience with nature, with the self, with God, and with reality as it is being lived. A person sees something and the seeing becomes inward. Then, if it can be shared at all, it has to be shared through metaphor, idiom, parable, symbol, or story. We can go and look at many different philosophers, mystics, and teachers and see how they describe what wisdom represents and what it means. But I am only giving mine. I cannot remember what all of the philosophers said or every single thing they said. It is all in my subconsciousness. I do not represent them, but because I have listened to what they all have to say, and because it is all within my subconsciousness, in one way or another, they are speaking through me. It has shaped how I think. It has shaped what I am going to say. So we can feel wisdom in our heart. We can feel the pressure. There is always a sense of the body. We know that what we hold now as our point of view is held upon idea. And if you do not understand what I mean by that, basically, as far as I can tell from my point of view, everything beyond me is imagined. I am the only thing I can say is real, because everything that is around me and everything I interact with conspires within my mind. It is within me. I do not see the actual thing. I see it in my mind. I see it in my imagination within my mind. And that is for all senses. It all returns to the eye that is of the imagination. A newborn child is born wise, then forgets wisdom into knowledge. Later, the old man remembers wisdom again, and then loses the mind to forget once more. The small child playing with a stick and using imagination is still receiving epiphany according to the degree of awareness available to that child. Wisdom does not belong only to adults, intellectuals, philosophers, or mystics. Every individual, at every point in life, participates in this movement according to their own degree of awareness. The river shows this. One may ask whether it is wise to walk to the river, wise to put one's head into the river, wise to see the river as full, wise to see it as empty, wise to see it as flowing, or wise to sit beside it and listen to the murmur of the water. Each question fails when treated as a simple yes or no. Then the deeper question appears: how can wisdom ever be known? The answer is in the question. The question and the answer are the same, but the answer is not the same as the question. As soon as the question is asked, the answer is already present. If the answer is nothing, not no thing, but nothing, then it goes beyond what ordinary words can hold. This is the difficulty of wisdom. The question does not merely lead to the answer. The question itself is already participating in the answer. Yet the answer cannot be reduced back into the question as though the two were interchangeable. The cup became another symbol. The cup is not simply empty or full. Empty and full arise by contrast. If there were no empty, there could be no full. If there were no full, there could be no empty. But this is not a simple reversible equality. The empty is the same as the full, but the full is not the same as the empty. That is the asymmetry. It is not a flat duality. It is dual paradoxical simultaneity. The cup being empty and the cup being full are not identical as objects. They are not merely opposites either. They are relational appearances. They arise through one another, but they do not mirror each other equally. The empty contains the possibility and condition of fullness. The full depends upon the empty, but fullness cannot become primary in the same way emptiness can. Ordinary language expects identity to be reversible, but this is not ordinary identity. It is paradoxical dependency. The same applies to good and evil, night and day, man and woman, left and right, up and down, near and far, large and small. These are not merely opposites. They arise relationally. Each becomes intelligible through the other, but not in a perfectly equal mirrored way. When speaking of the cup, one must also be careful not to reduce the symbol into a literal bucket full of water. The fullness being spoken of is not quantitative fullness. It is not a container filled with substance. It is a fullness that cannot be measured in the ordinary way. The moment the fullness is conceived through contrast, emptiness appears alongside it. Not because emptiness exists independently, but because thought operates through distinction. If there cannot truly be an empty, then there cannot truly be a full in the ordinary sense either, because each term borrows intelligibility from the other. Language creates the polarity while failing to describe what precedes the polarity. The thought of fullness collapses it into an idea. That idea gives the mind something called fullness, but the mind only recognizes it by contrast with emptiness. That is why the empty and the full are the same polarity, not identical as objects, not opposites as separate things. but simultaneous relational appearance. This same structure appears in the idea of truth. I have to pay very close attention to where I say truth and where I say the truth, because there is a nuance there. There is truth, and then there is the truth. Truth can be something like 1 + 1 = 2. That is truth. But that is not the truth. The truth that I am speaking of is the infinite. So it cannot really be spoken of. The moment we speak of it, it is already falling into something else. This is where the wording matters. I am not calling it the way. I am saying way. It is way, the truth, and the life. Then there is life from the life. Putting the word "the" before a word changes a lot in the occult. You do not simply say truth when speaking of God the Son. You say the truth because the truth is not the same as truth. There is only one truth. It is the infinite. It is the light that is darkness. It is the Son of God. It is the life, and life comes from the life. It is invisible, like in a dream. You are in it, and because you are in it, you think you can see everything. But what you are seeing has a dual nature. Way that can be spoken is not the true Tao. In the same way, the truth that can be spoken is not the truth itself. It can only be pointed toward, and even the pointing changes it. When we say truth, we have already turned it into an idea called truth. But the idea of truth requires lie. So lie appears within the field of truth. Truth and lie arise from the truth, but the truth itself is not merely the word truth. Saying the truth is not the truth. It is the finger pointing. The word points, but the word also creates the contrast that lets the idea appear. In order to have the idea of truth called truth, lie must also appear. Then lie is not outside the field. It is held within the very structure by which truth becomes thinkable. This is why truth and lie can be spoken of in relation to wisdom. Wisdom does not merely know the difference between truth and lie in the ordinary sense. Wisdom sees the symbolic structure by which these things arise in thought. So when I say that the truth comes from God, falls into a lie, becomes knowledge, transforms into wisdom, and then returns back to God, that has to be understood carefully. It cannot mean ordinary truth, like a fact or a statement. It is speaking about the movement of the truth as it descends into expression, becomes limited by language and mind, becomes knowledge through experience, becomes wisdom through understanding, and returns back to what cannot truly be spoken. This opens into the Godhead. The second person of the Godhead, where the infinite or the truth is placed, is androgynous because it stands alone. It is not merely the idea of truth. It is the manifestation, the image, the pointing, the knowable face of what cannot be spoken directly. The third person of the Godhead, the Holy Spirit, is where duality appears as living movement. This is where wisdom is found as flow, breath, wind, water, space between the stars, divine femininity, without form and void, invisible and yet visible in another sense. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit cannot be separated, but they also cannot be flattened into one plain sameness. They are not three separate beings, not interchangeable identities, and not symmetrical parts. They are relational manifestation without separation. The Father is ungraspable beyond speech. The Son is image, manifestation, knowability, relation, and the finger pointing. The Holy Spirit is living flow, breath, motion, transmission, relational presence, and the invisible movement by which wisdom is encountered. This is why symbols like water, breath, wind, space, void, flowing movement, and divine femininity belong near this idea. Not because the Spirit is a literal object called wind or water, but because those symbols point toward motion without fixed containment. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But that is not just a sentence to read. It is symbolism. Lord in capitals matters. Fear does not simply mean terror. Wisdom begins in reverent alignment before what cannot be reduced, possessed, named, or controlled. Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. That does not mean a person asks once and immediately receives the thing exactly as imagined. It does not mean the door opens in the expected way, at the expected time, into the expected room. The miracle of God is within the timing of reality for the individual. Knowledge may be gathered, forgotten, and left dormant in the subconscious. Then, when the proper time comes, what was acquired in the past rises into meaning. The person becomes capable of understanding it, and things that seemed scattered begin to align. Wisdom appears through timing. A person may study something, learn something, and then forget about it. It rests below conscious attention. Later, when life creates the right condition, that forgotten knowledge returns as understanding. What seemed dormant becomes useful. What seemed scattered begins to reveal order. This is part of how wisdom differs from mere knowledge. Knowledge can be acquired. Wisdom ripens. Wisdom is not becoming clever enough to avoid getting hit by a car. It is not being able to say something intelligent. It is not worldly sharpness. Wisdom is what brings the self closer to God. It is the inward seeing of divinity through the symbolic structure of all things. That is why wisdom is not only about knowing. It is also about feeling, pressure, intuition, the heart, the body, and the way perception is held. But even then, the moment I explain it, I have already turned it into something less than what it is. Turning something into something less than what it is happens naturally the moment it enters expression. It is not because expression is wrong. It is because the moment something is thought about, spoken, named, or held as an idea, it has already been brought into a smaller form. It has become something the mind can look at. But even saying the mind is tricky, because that makes it sound like I am talking only about my personal mind, as if I am the one producing thought by myself. That is not what I mean. In Hermeticism, it says, "The all is mind, the universe is mental." My mind is not the same as the all that is mind. But then how could it be completely different? That is like saying, inside my dream, that my mind in the dream is not the same as my mind when I am awake. That is true, but it is also not true. Inside the dream, the mind appears personal, limited, and separate. But the dream itself is still appearing within the waking mind. So the dream mind is not the waking mind, and yet it cannot be separate from it. But even that comparison only goes so far. With myself in the dream and myself awake, I can still make a comparison. I can speak of one level and another level. But when we speak of the all, or God, or the mind behind all appearance, it reaches a point where no comparison can truly be made. That is why we use the comparison. The comparison becomes a symbol. It becomes something seen by wisdom, not by intellectual words being built into an idol or an image. This is where thought matters. When I say thought, I am not only talking about personal thinking. I am not only talking about the little voice in the head. Thought points toward thought before it becomes my thought or your thought. Thought is not singular, and it is not simply dual either. It is prior to the personal claim of I am thinking. So when something enters expression, it is not merely that I personally thought it and reduced it. It is that expression itself belongs to thought before it becomes personal thought. It descends into the all that is mind, and into the universe that is mental, where it can appear as idea, word, image, memory, imagination, and experience. Reality is not a dream, but it is like a dream. And even then, we cannot really say what a dream is, because we do not know what mind is. We do not know what consciousness is. We do not know what energy is. We do not know what electricity is. We do not know what magnetism is. Then, when we stop to think about it, we realize we do not know what anything is. That is right. Because, like in a dream, we do not know what anything is in itself. Only while we are in the dream does anything have its meaning, its place, its weight, and its appearance. So when I say everything, I mean everything. That does not mean I have to start naming every single thing. Sometimes examples are useful because they give contrast, but the point is not the examples. You can say the background and the foreground are the same. You can say the tree and yourself are the same. You can say the ground and the sky are the same. But the question immediately becomes, the same as what? The same as not being indifference. The same as not being truly separate. And then even that has to be questioned, because the moment we say it, thought continues. It keeps turning inward. It keeps going deeper. That process of thinking about things from inside the thing and going deeper into it is part of wisdom. But I still cannot outright say what wisdom is. I can only point the way according to my own seeing. There is also something like going to the gym. You do not go to the gym once and expect the full result. If there is no resistance, nothing develops. If the weight is too light, it does not form you properly. If the weight is too heavy, you cannot lift it. Life works in a similar way. Wisdom does not come from one moment, one answer, or one lesson. It comes through repeated pressure, repeated experience, repeated return. The pressure has to be enough to form you, but not so much that it destroys the movement. When Lord is written in all capital letters, I understand it symbolically as a crown. It is like there is a crown upon the head. But the head that the crown is on is also the crown of the heart. So when Lord is written in all capitals, I see the head sitting upon the heart. I see the crown above the head, and the head as the crown of the heart. To speak further than that, we cannot. And even saying we cannot speak further is already speaking further. So now the whole thing is upside down, backwards, and inside out. That is why we can even say Lord. I know there are different historical definitions of the word Lord. I know the word can be traced through language, hierarchy, older meanings, and all of that. But I am speaking symbolically. Each letter can also be broken down further because everything is sacred point, line, and waveform geometry. But that is another subject, and I am not going into that here. For this thought, the important image is the crown of the heart with a crown upon its head. That can also be understood through the stars and through the crown of thorns, but I do not want to open too many symbols at once and confuse the point. The point is that Lord in capitals is not just a word on a page. It is symbolic placement. It shows crown, head, heart, and the limit of speech before what cannot be reduced. Now is not a single fixed point. Now is a manner of forgotten nows being made present again through memory and imagination. The present is not something we simply stand inside clearly. It is constantly being formed through memory, forgetting, imagination, and the arrival of new ideas. We are remembering what was forgotten, forgetting while we remember, imagining what may come, and receiving new impressions at the same time. Even the ideas we already have are changing while we are thinking them. So thought is not just one thing happening in the mind. Thought is the whole movement of memory, forgetting, imagination, sensation, idea, and transformation happening together. The now is always forming, dissolving, and reforming inside thought. And if this is happening in us, then we have to imagine how it is happening on a level beyond personal explanation. Not as my private thought, not as one person's mind, but as thought moving through the all that is mind, where the universe is mental, and where every idea, memory, image, and experience appears within the continuum. That is why wisdom cannot be explained as mere information. Wisdom sees the movement without mistaking the image for the thing itself. Take the copy. How can wisdom even be explained without turning it into something less than what it is? Wisdom begins with the recognition that way which can be spoken is already not the living way itself. Speech is not useless, but it is already one step removed from what it points toward. The word is not the movement. The name is not the living current. Explanation cannot become the thing itself. So wisdom does not begin by adding more and more knowledge. Knowledge collects, names, stores, and gathers things into the mind. The way moves differently. It strips away force, unnecessary grasping, and the need to control everything. In that sense, wisdom is closer to unlearning than accumulation. A person does not become wise by forcing reality into a private idea. Alignment comes by learning how not to interfere with the movement already moving. This is not laziness. It is not doing nothing. It is action without force, movement that does not break the thing it moves with. Water is a perfect symbol for this. Water does not argue with the shape of the valley. It does not need to prove itself. It descends, flows, nourishes what is beneath it, and takes the low place. Because of that, it moves through everything. Wisdom moves like that. It does not stand above and announce itself. It does not need to conquer, become loud, or win every argument. It fits itself to what is without losing itself. Knowing others may be intelligence, but knowing oneself is the deeper turning. Mastering another person may show strength, but mastery of oneself shows something deeper than strength. The one who believes he knows everything is already sick with knowing. The one who knows that he does not know is closer to the beginning of wisdom. Not because ignorance itself is wisdom, but because humility opens the gate. If a person cannot see his own ignorance, reality cannot teach him. This fits directly with the problem of wisdom being felt. Wisdom is not merely a definition, a trophy of the intellect, or something the mind can grab. It is alignment with what cannot be possessed. The more the mind tries to control it, the more it loses the way. The more the self tries to claim it, the more wisdom becomes a false image. So wisdom is the quiet knowing of how to move without forcing, how to know without pretending to possess, how to speak while understanding that speech has already fallen short, and how to let go without becoming empty in the shallow sense. This is not weakness, passivity, or confusion. It is the strength of moving with the hidden structure of things. Wisdom is not separated from reverence. It begins where the person stands before God and understands that he cannot reduce what is above him into a tool for himself. This is why the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Fear here cannot be flattened into terror. It is reverent awareness before what cannot be possessed, controlled, named, or reduced. It is the trembling recognition that the self does not stand at the center as its own God. That is why Lord in capitals matters symbolically. Lord in capitals is not only a word on a page. It can be seen as crown, head, and heart. The crown rests upon the head, and the head itself becomes the crown of the heart. The crowned head sits upon the heart, and the heart becomes the throne beneath it. To speak beyond that is already to move into what cannot be properly said. Even saying it cannot be said is already saying too much. That is why the symbol turns upside down, backwards, and inside out. Wisdom is not simply knowing many things. It is learning how to stand rightly before the source of wisdom. It is moral, spiritual, relational, and practical at the same time. It is not divorced from life. A wise person learns from every person. That matters because wisdom is not arrogance. The wise man is not the one who believes he has nothing left to receive. He is not merely the man with answers. He is the one who can still learn. This connects directly to what I have already been saying. A person cannot simply claim himself to be wise. If he claims wisdom as possession, he has inverted it. And one man cannot easily place wisdom on another from the outside like a badge. Wisdom is not a title, decoration, or costume. It is also hidden. It cannot be bought like gold, dug out of the earth like a mineral, or measured as a possession. It is worth more than objects because it is not an object at all. And yet wisdom is not detached from daily life. It orders speech, action, judgment, discipline, humility, justice, mercy, learning, restraint, and the way a person walks before God and man. So wisdom is not merely knowing what is correct. It is reverent alignment, humility before God, the ability to learn from every person, the willingness to receive correction, and the joining of knowledge, understanding, and lived righteousness. Wisdom is not only in the head. It descends into the heart. When the head and heart are rightly crowned, the person begins to live in a way that is not merely clever, but ordered toward God. Wisdom is not merely learning sacred ideas. It is the realization of the self and the right ordering of action, knowledge, devotion, and detachment. The mind can know many things and still remain bound. A person can read, study, repeat, and argue, but if the self is still tangled in desire, fear, pride, and attachment, wisdom has not ripened. Wisdom is not dead information. It is knowledge that purifies. It changes the one who knows. It does not sit outside the person as something memorized. It becomes discernment, steadiness, and inner clarity. This is why steady wisdom matters. The one of steady wisdom is not thrown around by every desire that rises in the mind. Pleasure, pain, success, failure, praise, insult, gain, and loss do not own him. He still acts, but he is not chained to the fruit of action. That does not make him cold. Detachment is not indifference. It means the person acts sincerely without making the result into his master. He does what must be done, but he does not turn the outcome into his God. He participates in life without being swallowed by the changing surface of life. This fits with the idea that wisdom ripens. Knowledge may be acquired, but wisdom must become embodied. It has to move through action, discipline, suffering, devotion, self-examination, and surrender. It must pass from concept into being. Wisdom also sees that the personal self is not the final self. The little mind says, I am this body, this name, this story, this desire, this fear, this opinion. But deeper seeing begins to recognize that the self is not merely the changing personality, the surface of thought, or the temporary mask moving through pleasure and pain. This connects to the dream image. Inside a dream, the dream self seems real within the dream. It has a body, a location, a fear, a desire, and a world around it. But when one wakes, the whole thing is seen differently. The dream self was not false in the sense of nothing, but it was not ultimate either. So wisdom does not destroy the world. It sees through wrong identification. The world appears. The body appears. The mind appears. The story appears. But the wise person begins to ask, what is the self that knows these appearances? This is not a cheap escape from life. It is the purification of seeing. Wisdom is discernment, knowing the difference between the changing and the changeless, between the surface self and the deeper self, between action and attachment, between knowledge as concept and knowledge as realization. It is devotion without blindness, action without bondage, knowledge becoming liberation. Wisdom cannot be separated from God, from the Word, from the cross, from the Spirit, and from the life that is not merely life in the ordinary sense. Here again, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But this wisdom opens into the mystery of Christ as the wisdom of God. This is where the distinction between truth and the truth matters. Truth can be a statement. 1 + 1 = 2. That is truth, but it is not the truth. The truth is not merely a correct sentence. The truth is living. It is not only spoken, it is embodied. That is why we do not simply say truth when speaking of God the Son. We say the truth. It is way, the truth, and the life. Then there is life from the life, the word that changes the whole field. The truth is not one truth among other truths. The life is not one life among other lives. The life is the source from which life is received. So wisdom is not only knowing facts about God. It is participation in the life that comes from God. This turns ordinary wisdom upside down. The wisdom of the world seeks power, status, proof, cleverness, and domination. The wisdom of God appears in a form the world may call foolish: humility, surrender, mercy, sacrifice, forgiveness, purity, peace, and the cross. That does not make wisdom weak. Divine wisdom is not measured by worldly strength. The wisdom from above is pure, peaceable, gentle, full of mercy and good fruit, without hypocrisy. This is not merely a moral checklist. It describes the quality of wisdom when it descends into the person. If wisdom makes a man proud, cruel, boastful, cold, or false, then it has already become something else. True wisdom softens without weakening. It clarifies without becoming arrogant. It judges without becoming hateful. It sees without pretending to possess everything it sees. This returns to the problem of speaking. The word can be spoken, but the word is not merely sound. The truth can be named, but the name is not a tool for possession. The life can be pointed toward, but it cannot be reduced into explanation. So wisdom is not merely knowledge. It is Christ-shaped knowing, the mind humbled before God, the heart purified, the life conformed to mercy, the self brought closer to God, and the person changed by the Spirit. It is the inward seeing of divinity through all things, but not in a way that makes the self God. All things point back, and the pointing is not the thing itself. Wisdom cuts through confusion. It is not simply having an opinion about life, believing whatever the mind produces, or clinging to the self, the world, desire, suffering, or even ideas about wisdom. Wisdom begins with right view. Right view does not mean having a rigid opinion and defending it. It means beginning to see clearly how suffering arises, how craving binds, how clinging forms the self, how actions bear fruit, and how release becomes possible. The fool who knows he is foolish is already closer to wisdom than the fool who believes himself wise. That connects directly to what I have already said. A person cannot claim wisdom as possession without inverting it. If he says, "I am wise," and means it as an egoic trophy, then he has already fallen away from wisdom. Wisdom is not interested in decorating the self. It is interested in seeing through the self. That does not mean denying lived experience. It means seeing that what we call self is not as solid as it first appears. Body, feeling, perception, formation, and consciousness arise and pass. The person keeps saying "I," but the things being called "I" are always shifting. This fits with the thought about nows. Now is not a single fixed point. The present forms through memory, forgetting, imagination, sensation, and the arrival of new ideas. Even while we remember, we forget. Even while we imagine, new impressions enter. Even while identity is being held, it is changing. Wisdom sees impermanence directly. Everything that arises passes. What is born changes. What is grasped slips. What is clung to becomes suffering. What is seen clearly can be released. This does not make wisdom cold. Real wisdom gives rise to compassion, because when the illusion of separate self is loosened, the suffering of others is not treated as alien. Compassion is not sentimental weakness. It is the natural movement of clear seeing when selfish clinging begins to thin. So wisdom here is not merely thinking deeply. It is waking up from confusion, seeing arising and passing, seeing suffering and the cause of suffering, seeing that the mind creates images and then suffers by clinging to them, seeing that the image is not the thing itself. When wisdom sees this clearly, the grip loosens. Wisdom is insight that liberates by seeing through illusion, craving, clinging, and the mistaken solidity of the self. It is not a theory. It is a seeing. Wisdom is a gift from God, and whoever is given wisdom has been given abundant good. That matters because wisdom is not merely cleverness, intelligence, debate, or the ability to arrange concepts beautifully. Wisdom is given, bestowed, connected to guidance, remembrance, submission, justice, mercy, discernment, and right placement. Wisdom is also putting things in their proper place. It is not only knowing the right thing. It is knowing how, when, where, and why something belongs. A word can be true and still be wrongly placed. A correction can be accurate and still be unwise. Silence can be wiser than speech. Speech can be wiser than silence. Wisdom knows placement. This connects to timing. The miracle of God is within the timing of reality for the individual. A person may ask, seek, knock, study, forget, suffer, return, and only later understand why the answer could not have been received earlier. This belongs close to surrender. Submission does not mean the destruction of intelligence. It means intelligence bows before God rather than worshiping itself. The mind is not thrown away. It is purified by remembrance and placed under what is higher than itself. Wisdom also belongs with the heart. The heart is not merely emotion. It is the inner organ of recognition. A person may have information and still be veiled. Language may be present without understanding. The same words may be heard again and again until one day the heart receives what the ear had already heard. That is wisdom ripening. Wisdom is not separated from revelation, but it is also not reduced to repeating words without understanding. It knows how guidance descends into life. Not only recitation, placement, balance, remembrance, mercy, surrender. The heart recognizing what the mind alone cannot hold. Wisdom is God-given discernment that places the self, the word, the act, the time, and the heart in right relation before God. Wisdom begins with mind. The all is mind, the universe is mental. But this cannot be understood in a shallow way. It does not mean my personal mind invents everything. My private mind is not the all. My personal thought is not the source of all existence. And yet it cannot be completely separate either. This is why the dream comparison matters. Inside a dream, the mind of the dream self is not the same as the waking mind. That is true. But it is also not true, because the dream self and dream world both appear within the waking mind. The dream mind is not the waking mind, and yet it is not separate from it. Even this comparison only goes so far. With dream self and waking self, one level can still be compared to another. I can say this is dream and that is waking. But when speaking of the all, God, or the mind behind appearance, there is no higher outside position from which to compare. The comparison breaks. That is why comparison becomes symbol. This is also where thought matters. Thought is not merely my private thinking, nor only the small voice in the head. Thought points toward thought before it becomes my thought or your thought. Thought is not singular, and it is not simply dual either. It is before the personal claim of I am thinking. So when something enters expression, it is not merely that I personally thought it and reduced it. Expression itself belongs to thought before it becomes personal thought. It descends into the all that is mind, and into the universe that is mental, where it can appear as idea, word, image, memory, imagination, and experience. Wisdom sees correspondence. As above, so below. As within, so without. But that cannot be flattened into a slogan. The same pattern appears across levels, but not in a crude identical way. The higher and lower correspond without being the same object. The inner and outer reflect without becoming simple copies. That fits with the cup. Empty and full are not merely opposites. They arise together as relational appearance. The empty is the same as the full, but the full is not the same as the empty. This is not ordinary identity. It is asymmetry. It is dual paradoxical simultaneity. Wisdom also sees polarity, rhythm, vibration, and transformation. Things swing, correspond, and move between poles. But wisdom does not get trapped in the surface swing. It learns the law of movement without being blindly ruled by it. This also connects to alchemy. Wisdom is not merely collecting ideas. It is transformation. The base material of experience, suffering, memory, desire, confusion, and knowledge is worked upon until it becomes something higher. The person himself becomes the vessel. The work is not outside him only. The work is him. This returns to the line. The truth comes from God, falls into a lie, becomes knowledge, transforms into wisdom, and then returns back to God. Hermetically, that is descent and return. manifestation and reintegration. The movement from the unspoken into form, through form, and back toward what form can only point toward. Wisdom recognizes mind, correspondence, polarity, rhythm, and transformation. It knows the universe is mental without worshiping the personal mind. It understands that the symbol is not the thing, but the symbol is also not nothing. The symbol is the bridge. So when all 7 currents are allowed to speak through the same question, wisdom is still not reduced to one flat definition. I am not trying to leave these as separate boxes. They all return to the same problem. Wisdom is not mere knowledge, intelligence, beautiful speech, possession, badge, or object that can be handed from one person to another. It is the living movement by which knowledge, experience, reverence, humility, suffering, timing, intuition, discernment, and transformation begin to bring the self closer to God. Wisdom is felt, but not merely as emotion. Known, but not merely as information. Seen, but not merely with the eyes. Spoken, but never fully captured by speech. Personal, but not private. Moving through the individual, but not belonging to the ego. Happening in the moment, yet ripening through time. Pointed toward, but never possessed. Lived, but not finally defined. So the question remains alive. Is wisdom because it is felt? Maybe wisdom is not because it is felt in the ordinary sense. Maybe it is felt because it is already moving deeper than ordinary knowing. Maybe feeling is one of the ways wisdom touches the body, the heart, the mind, the imagination, and the soul. But wisdom is not only the feeling. Wisdom is the movement by which feeling becomes understanding, understanding becomes transformation, and transformation returns the self closer to God. Amen. Let it be so.